Hello and welcome to the Better Dad Workshop. My name is Ricardo Salcido and this is my co-host Charles Earhart.
Good evening.
Charles, today you've put together a workshop that is basically about stress, its management, and guilt. All right, so let's get started with the first question. Now, most of the fathers watching these seminars are striving to be good fathers. Along the way, we'll make mistakes, and mistakes can cause stress. And stress affects the quality of the relationship, of any relationship. Any suggestions on management?
Okay. Yes, the quality of the relationship, which is part of the environment that you're going to be providing for your child, has to be one that's temperate. It has to be one that's emotionally well balanced. So it's urgent. It's really urgent that you are able to understand how stress begins and what some of the symptoms are and why it's urgent for you to get this particular point together. As you know, some of the symptoms of stress are you usually feel physical and bodily changes. For instance, a accelerated heartbeat. You might feel a heavy breathing. You know, they're like flight or fight symptoms.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
and when you feel that, those are warning signs that the center isn't holding. So what you want to
Right.
do is try to contain, take a break for yourself for a couple of seconds or even a couple of minutes if that's what it is you need. But what you need to do then is approach your partner, and you don't make demands. You say, we have to discuss this in a rational way. Yeah, I know this is easier said than done.
Right.
But until such time that you are able to bring the level of anxiety down to a place where you feel like your partner is available for conversation, that's the most important part of this stress management.
Right. Right.
So-
Well, and let me interrupt you to say that, like everything else, it is learned behavior.
Yeah, it's a skill.
The
It's
skill
absolutely
of-
a skill. Oh, sure.
Communication, and when you and also, I watched this really great TED talk about stress, and how this particular doctor was she was spending a lot of time telling people to get rid of it, but like you just said, it's the body preparing for something. So when you feel it coming, then it's sort of that's your signal to take a deep breath and work on what it is that you're gonna talk to your parent, your spouse about.
Okay, well, that's a start. You know, you actually have to, once the symptoms become apparent, the next step in learning skills is communication skills. So you have to have both. You have to have a self-awareness of your body responses. And sometimes, sometimes the symptoms are, aside from the obvious physical symptoms, they're psychological symptoms. If you feel yourself starting to feel sarcastic, or you suddenly get a little more silent than you usually are, you notice that your communication has taken a left turn, those are also signs that you're annoyed about something and you're like reluctant to bring it up because you're afraid that the aggression that's inherent in any encounter in which you want to repair something, you're afraid that the response to you is going to be not positive.
Right.
So I think fathers are much more afraid of their abilities to communicate, a willingness to negotiate on things, so they zip it up and
Right.
they withhold communication,
Right.
which is like a tragic mistake because then things only get worse the more you repress it.
I'm glad that you mentioned some of these things to look for. I know that in my wife, I notice that she becomes very quiet. And so for me, that's very frustrating because I'm the opposite. The moment that we have a discussion, I totally, absolutely need to talk about it, right? I need to find out what's wrong. I want to get it over with. I want us to move forward, right? And then when I absolutely, earlier in our relationship, when I didn't like something, the sarcasm was definitely a good way. Or a good way. Not a good
It's
way.
like a fallback. It's not the
Yeah.
great way. Yeah. No, it's a trap. You don't want to get angry, especially if you're modeling for your children.
Right.
And if these arguments break out, when the children are still present, you might do well to say, maybe we should talk this over later when the kids are asleep.
Right.
But I think, especially if you're arguing over the dinner table, I mean, it makes, the community center is the dinner table. This
Right.
is where everybody gets together and becomes a family.
Right.
And if all of a sudden that the symbol there, of this community becomes tragically like disrupted.
Right.
And the feeling there, the vibe at that table, then kids they wind up absorbing these bad vibes and acting them out in some other way.
Yeah.
They get anxious, and how do they express their anger? Because they're not aware of communication skills yet. They're too young. So what do? They go out and they act out our anxiety. They have the siblings start fighting, or like they start torturing the dog or the cat.
Right.
Or they start not doing their homework.
Yeah.
So you see, that's why, in terms of the children's welfare, which is what we're always primarily concerned about, that if we don't learn how to resolve these fights by good modeling and by good communication techniques, the kids wind up acting it out.
In your practice, do you find that fathers are comparing themselves to other
fathers?
Yeah?
Oh yes, and I think this is one of the worst things that you can do. If you talk to other fathers and they tell you that they have their own, hey, there's nothing wrong with listening to another father and confirming, or suggesting that there are alternative ways of resolving an argument. But if another father tells you something about, hey, you got to get tough with her, I mean, that's not the kind of advice you really need.
Right.
And so maybe you could counter by saying, I found that quiet negotiations, with a reasonable compromise are usually the best way to resolve one of these arguments.
Let me ask you another question here. What are some things that are essential that keep stress levels manageable, right? Beyond, or maybe starting with recognizing the symptoms, which you spoke about earlier.
Well, somebody is you're talking about management or resolution.
Well,
for instance.
So some things that are essential that keep stress levels manageable. You have first recognize the symptoms: annoyance, hostility, sarcasm, blaming. We already sort of went over this.
We did go over this, and
so then
just to emphasize
the first one, I think that they also know when you drop the ball, don't be too proud to.
Well,
so let me ask the question again then.
Okay.
And then you can go over some of the things that you missed during the first question, right? All right. So then, so what are some things that are essential? Again, what are some things that are essential that keep the stress levels manageable?
Okay. Well, first of all, communication skills are at the very top of the list. When we've explained how what the symptoms are, and it's the communication skills help us manage the closeness and the compromising mechanisms that we apply to these circumstances that have created a disruption in the continuity of taking care of our children in the best way. Incidentally, these arguments usually break out over the very essential needs that children have. That for instance, discipline, education, whether there's going to be any religious instruction. Those are the things that I think we should be aware that those areas are most often the most prominent in how what creates the rupture in our communication. And then we find out maybe a little exploration of how each of the parents grew up and what was the protocol in their
talk
particular
about something
families.
that people usually never talk about, right? But we've been through so much material so far. Why don't we let's go ahead and review some of this before we go on. So what we have here is that dads need to accept they will make mistakes. Reviewing here, dads need to accept they will make mistakes. Don't dwell on them. Look to the future and I'm sorry.
Oh, and then learn
No. I wasn't sure if. Yeah, it is. Okay, hold on. I'll start over. Okay, so let's see. Dads need to accept they will make mistakes. Don't dwell on them. Look to the future and create realistic goals. If guilt is causing stress, look for physical and emotional origins, headaches, anxiety, depression, and finally
Learn the ways to de-escalate the stress, like cooperative communication. Family outings are